May 1863. Union General Joseph Hooker commanded 130,000 soldiers. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had 60,000. More than 2-to-1 advantage. Better supplies, better equipment. Victory seemed inevitable. Hooker even had a brilliant plan, a two-pronged assault designed to envelope and crush Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. This was supposed to end the war. Instead, Hooker made one decision in the middle of the night and lost everything. This is the story of the Battle of Chancellorsville and how one abandoned hill decided the fate of 190,000 men. They called him Fighting Joe. Joseph Hooker took command of the Army of the Potomac in January 1863, and he was confident, arrogant even. He'd watched previous Union generals fail against Robert E. Lee. McDowell, Pope, Burnside, all beaten. Hooker believed he was different, smarter, more aggressive, and honestly, his plan was good. While Lee's army camped near Fredericksburg, Virginia, Hooker split his massive force. He'd send part of his army to pin Lee in place. Meanwhile, the bulk of his troops, over 70,000 men, would march upstream, cross the Rappahannock River, and swing around to hit Lee from behind. A classic flanking maneuver, textbook strategy, and with his numerical advantage, it should have worked. By late April, Hooker's forces were in position. Lee was caught between two Union armies. The trap was set. Hooker was so confident he told his officers, "The enemy must either ingloriously fly or give us battle on our own ground where certain destruction awaits him." He believed he'd already won. May 1st, 1863, the armies collided near a crossroads called Chancellorsville, barely a village, just a large brick mansion and a few buildings surrounded by dense forest called the Wilderness. Hooker advanced. His troops pushed forward confidently. Then something strange happened. After brief contact with Confederate forces, Hooker suddenly ordered his army to pull back into defensive positions around Chancellorsville. His subordinate generals were stunned. They had momentum. They outnumbered the enemy 2-to-1. Why stop? But Hooker had seen Lee's army moving. He'd convinced himself Lee was preparing a massive counterattack. Better to dig in and let Lee smash himself against Union defenses. Lee, however, wasn't planning a defensive battle. He was planning something insane. That night, Lee and Stonewall Jackson huddled by a campfire. They made a decision that violated every rule of military strategy. They would split their already outnumbered army. Jackson would take 28,000 men on a 12-mile forced march through the forest to hit Hooker's right flank. Lee would stay behind with just 14,000 troops to face the entire Union army. If Hooker attacked while Jackson was marching, Lee's tiny force would be annihilated. But Lee bet everything on Hooker's caution. And he was right. May 2nd, after 8 brutal hours of marching through dense woods, Jackson's corps emerged from the forest directly behind the Union right flank. At 5:15 p.m., 28,000 screaming Confederates erupted from the tree line. The Union flank collapsed. Soldiers fled in panic. Entire regiments broke and ran. For hours, it looked like Lee and Jackson had done the impossible, beaten an army twice their size through sheer audacity. But darkness stopped the Confederate assault. Jackson had won a stunning tactical victory, but he hadn't destroyed Hooker's army. Not yet. That night, tragedy struck the Confederates. Stonewall Jackson, riding ahead to scout positions in the darkness, was accidentally shot by his own men. He'd survive the wound, but die a week later from complications. Lee had won the day, but lost his greatest general. As night fell on May 2nd, Union commanders worked frantically. Jackson's surprise attack had shattered their right flank, but they still had overwhelming numbers. They dug in, They positioned artillery. They prepared defensive lines. Tomorrow, they'd stop Lee's attack. Then they'd counterattack with their massive numerical advantage and crush him. The key to the entire battlefield was a piece of high ground called Hazel Grove. It was a cleared hilltop that dominated the surrounding forest. General Daniel Sickles' corps held it. From Hazel Grove, Union artillery could rain death on any Confederate attack. The position sat right between the two separated wings of Lee's divided army. Whoever controlled Hazel Grove controlled the battlefield. Union artillery officers knew this. They positioned their guns perfectly. Come morning, those cannons would tear apart any Confederate assault. Then, sometime during the night, General Hooker made a decision to tighten his defensive lines and consolidate his forces. He ordered Sickles to abandon Hazel Grove. It was the worst decision of the entire battle, possibly one of the worst decisions of the entire war. As Federal troops withdrew from Hazel Grove in the darkness, Confederate officers watching from the tree line couldn't believe their eyes. The enemy was giving up the most important piece of terrain on the battlefield, voluntarily. One Confederate officer later wrote, "It was a fatal error. Rebel forces rushed forward to occupy the abandoned hill." Among them was Colonel Edward Porter Alexander, just 25 years old, but already recognized as one of the most brilliant artillery officers in either army. The moment Alexander reached Hazel Grove and looked around, he understood what had just happened. He immediately ordered every available cannon rushed to the hilltop. 31 artillery pieces, the largest concentration of Confederate artillery assembled during the entire battle. Dawn was coming, and Alexander now had the high ground. May 3rd, first light. The battle resumed with savage intensity. Lee's outnumbered army battered against Union defensive lines. Men fought and died in a smoke-choked forest. Casualties mounted horrifically on both sides. But the battle's outcome now hinged on artillery, specifically the duel between Alexander's 31 guns on Hazel Grove and the Union batteries positioned at Fairview Hill, 1,200 yards away. For one of the few times in the entire war, Confederate artillery got the best of Federal guns. Alexander's position on higher ground gave his shells a devastating plunging trajectory. His gunners, many of them experienced veterans, worked with deadly precision. Confederate sharpshooters picked off Union gun crews one by one. Federal artillerists began running out of ammunition. Shells rained down on Fairview. Union guns fell silent, one by one. Hooker watched his artillery advantage evaporate. Around 9 a.m., a Confederate shell struck a wooden pillar of the Chancellor House, where Hooker was standing. The concussion knocked him unconscious. When he came to minutes later, he was dazed, possibly concussed, definitely shaken, and he'd lost his nerve. Despite having over 130,000 soldiers, despite most of his army having not yet fought, despite his subordinate generals begging him to commit his reserves and counterattack, Hooker ordered withdrawal from Fairview Hill. Alexander immediately advanced his guns forward to the newly abandoned position. From Fairview, Confederate artillery could now strike nearly every Federal position on the battlefield. The Confederates pressed their attack. The separated wings of Lee's army reunited triumphantly. Hooker, despite his overwhelming numerical advantage, pulled his entire army back into a tight defensive perimeter. May 4th, the armies faced each other without attacking. Lee planned to resume his assault on May 5th. He'd won tactically, but he knew Hooker still had tens of thousands of fresh troops. This wasn't over. But something had broken in Joseph Hooker. The confidence that had carried him into battle was gone, replaced by caution, by doubt, by fear. His corps commanders begged him to stay and fight. They had the numbers. They had strong defensive positions. They could still win. On the night of May 5th, he ordered a full retreat. His massive army, over 130,000 soldiers, crossed back over the Rappahannock River to safety. The campaign that was supposed to crush the Confederacy and end the war was over. Lee had won his most brilliant victory. Think about what this means. Hooker started with every advantage, more than double Lee's troop strength, better supplies, better equipment, a solid tactical plan, and he lost. Not because Lee was a better general, though he was brilliant. Not because of Stonewall Jackson's flank attack, though it was devastating. He lost primarily because of one decision made in the middle of the night, abandoning Hazel Grove. That single mistake gave Lee's artillery the high ground. That high ground won the artillery duel. Winning the artillery duel broke Hooker's confidence. And breaking Hooker's confidence won Lee the battle. One decision, one hill, one night. Military historians have spent over 160 years analyzing how Lee's smaller army defeated Hooker's larger one at Chancellorsville. The answer keeps coming back to that moment when Hooker gave up Hazel Grove. She gave Lee the battle and possibly extended the Civil War by years, all because of what happened in one night. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment.